Okay, I'm back. I'm flying solo this time, and I want to talk about the detachments for Thousand Sons in 10th edition. And let's start off right away with the different rankings. There, obviously, you go S, A, B, C, D, and that's probably good enough for our takes for now. The way I'm going to be looking at this is an S tier detachment is a detachment that is going to give you a chance to win a major tournament. Okay, these are creme de la creme. They're best in the entire game competitively right now. And I'll start off right now by just saying my take is that 0 of the detachments we have for Thousand Sons belong in S tier. None of them and none of the units and none of the rules that we have right now have a combination that sticks out to me as something that can really challenge for winning a major. That being said, crazier things happen. Doesn't mean there's outliers out there that folks can manage to pilot the army and get the right matchup path and have a win. Kudos to you. But I think that's the case with any army that's out there. Okay, so if we're just trying to level set here, I get it. There's ways for the army to do very, very well. And this is really looking at what are your best opportunities for that. So let's start in A tier, which is where I put Grand Coven. Okay? Grand Coven, the reason I put Grand Coven there is because it has been our strongest tool coming out of, that was our index detachment. And we retain nearly everything in that detachment that we had in the index. Not everything, but nearly everything. Magnus shouldn't be underestimated, especially the fact that he gets a little bit of a point reduction, but he also gets a little bit of a better interaction with the rule, or the army rule now. He's still a beast. He has a damage 2 sweep. He basically shoots phenomenally. He's no longer going to do as much to buff the army around him. He's not really going to be kind of like a leader of the army, which is a shame. But you're still going to do most of your Cabal casting with him. That's because he can do 2, and he gets massive boosts to his casting. So primarily the fact that you can also blank damage on him. And yes, we lose the reroll save, but that command point reroll is still there. You can strategically keep Magnus alive still and use him relatively the same as how we have been using him in the past. The Infernal Master with the Arcane Vortex still stays around. The one key difference in the list building, though, is that we don't have to build with lots of sorcerers anymore. It's much more oriented towards the units now in the army, which is good. We were very, very top heavy in the index. Now we're not quite so much there. You're still going to want to strategically take the characters that you need for the right enhancements. In my opinion, in Grand Coven, this might fit more my playstyle, but I think you are taking the Umbralific Crystal because it is one of the best enhancements in the entire game. You get to see what your missions are. You get to pick a unit up and move them all in that same turn. And you have the ability to do it turn 1. That's phenomenal. I think that goes for me on a Zangor Shaman with 20 Zangors. Yes, Zangors have a built-in uppy downy, but that uppy downy is not deep strike. That uppy downy is strat reserves. That's the restriction there. So you're talking board edges. And on top of that, you have to do that at the end of your opponent's turn. So you don't get a chance to do that turn 1, really, unless you're going second. And even then, it's, you're losing kind of the luster there on what you can do. You're limited on where you can really go on the board edge there, and you can't be in your opponent's deployment zone. Umbralific Crystal gets around that. You can go in their deployment zone. You can do it turn 1. It opens up the door for movement blocking. And I think Zangors, while they are not as tanky as they were in the index because they've lost that feel no pain that they had, I still think taking 20 of them at their price point not bad, especially for the mechanics. And honestly, there isn't a whole lot of stuff in the army that does a better job of just early game going out and sitting on an objective and saying, go ahead, try and shoot us. You're going to have to put a significant amount of shots into us to deal with it. And then finally, you have the ability to do a double new bolt. I think that's the third one you take. And quite frankly, being able to do 10 mortal wounds on average, not bad. That still keeps us in pace with what you would typically see previously. You can still pull that off. But you're going to have to get a little closer. And it's going to take a little bit more work. You're going to have to cast it the hard way to get there. So, you know, that's kind of the hard part of that. Not having a way to re-roll the Cabals is really going to hurt. So you're going to have some drawbacks to it. But all in all, I look at Grand Coven as having the strongest threat in the game because it has the ability to dish out the most unopposed damage and has the ability to threaten the board stronger than any of the other detachments when you look at all comers. Now, we're not talking about just going into certain matchups. Grand Coven gives you the best tools to do that across the board. And I could get into all the strategy of how that works out. I have other videos that I'm going to be working on that come out that talk about things like movement blocking with Zangors, strategies for how to pull that off. But all those things are very, very, very key tools. And they're things that, honestly, in my opinion, keep the army in a state which is A. Now, what's A tier even mean, right? A tier means you have an army strong enough to carry someone to like an X and 1 at a big tournament, okay? And big tournaments are the best measure for this because they give you the broadest exposure with usually the most results to see how things do across the board. It's not just one player doing really, really well with it. You get to look at the macro results there across lots of players that are all playing on the same terrain under the same rule set and at the same time, so it's the same meta. So it gives you the best results to look at and the best data to start to formulate. That's why GW bases most of their decisions on balancing off of their tournaments and the data collection they do there. So an A-tier army should be able to give you a chance, even for, I would say, decent players, to have a good path to, you know, a one-loss type of tournament. And that's a great result. That's something to be very proud of. That's not a, hey, this army sucks because that's as good as it can do. No, that's really, really good. And that's why it's A-tier. I just think it's going to lack the strength and the power right now to carry them over the top into that next tier like S-tier. We're missing the command point generation. That, hands down across the board for the whole army, is one of the biggest hindrances to the Codex. You're not going to have any way to generate command points, and that's a problem. Other than discarding secondaries, you don't want to be doing that anyways. You want to be scoring those. So you can't rely on that. Before, we had cultists. We also had ways to, you know, with our cabals, use stratagems without paying for stratagems. That was great. That kind of mitigated that. Without that now, it's a problem. We don't have the ability to really dump in the way we used to from a stratagem standpoint every single turn. So it's going to take some practice, I think, for most players coming over from the index to adapt their playstyle now to handle when do I spend that command point for re-rolling hits and wounds? When, or 2 command points now. When do I spend that command point for re-rolling a hit? Or re-rolling a save that's really, really important, something like that. You're going to have to be much, much, much more methodical about that than you were before. So all that being said, I think that's a great spot for Grand Coven. Let's get into the Warpforged Detachment, all right? This is the one that lets you bring a bunch of vehicles. It lets you basically have a Psyker nearby to let them re-roll hits and wounds. It kind of only lets you pick out 1 or 2. There's probably a natural tendency to try and veer towards things with lower shots, higher damage to maximize those rerolls, to make it feel like you're rerolling everything. I don't really buy into that all that much. The way I look at it, Warpforged is a good detachment for B tier. It's a army that will give you good choices into teams events. The significance about playing it in a teams format is that there is some semblance of control over the matchups that your army is going to be put into, which means you can gear this up to just stat into or slant into one archetype in your army, such as tanks or lots of little bodies. That's what you tend to see in teams more often, is more skewed type lists like that. And honestly, this detachment wants you to skew into vehicles. They want you to load up on things like Vindicators and so on and so forth. The way I look at it, it's not the kind of army that you can just roll up and play singles events with and just take on any army that's thrown at you, because you're going to have some matchups that are really, really bad. First being the Ultramarines army that's out there right now that just does what you're trying to do, but way better. And you just don't want to try and do that at tournaments, because you're just not going to be successful trying to copy what one army is doing, but doing it worse with another army. Just go play that army. I mean, that's the reality of it. I think you're probably starting with Vindicators. I think you're probably then loading up on things like Forge Fiends and Mutaliths. Yeah, they're not vehicles, I know. But they shoot much better than most of the other things we have. And I think that the ability of the Mutalist to hold some of the mid-board is better than just going all in on, say, las cannons on a Predator. The points are really attractive on the Annihilator. They're also really good on the Destructor. But I think there's better options in the Forge Fiend, because the Forge Fiend with plasmas can go into everything. I like the 3 damage, because when you get into situations like maybe if you're fighting Necrons and you're facing Catans, now you're at 2 damage, right? You're not at 1 damage with your assault cannons. That's kind of a little bit better. You're also looking at situations into elite units where plasma can be quite good, especially if it's big blobs of Terminators and things like that. There you go. You've got blast on each of your plasma guns. Personally, I prefer the route of taking the Demon Jaws on the Forge Fiend, because it doesn't make your Forge Fiend one-dimensional. Yes, you give up a 3rd plasma. We have nothing more really dumping into Forge Fiends like Chaos Space Marines, where they can get exploding hits and lethal hits and, all these things that they can put on it, so you do want as many shots as you want. In our army, we're not really getting that. We're really just kind of trying to maximize what you already have, and you're leaning on those data sheets there. And if you load in for 3 plasmas and you don't take that Demon Jaw, well, if you look at the profile, if something charges your Forge Fiend, that's basically all people have to realize, is that they just charge your Forge Fiend, and then it's shooting at -1 to hit the rest of the game, essentially, and it can't shoot the stuff in combat because those are blast guns. So at least with the Demon Jaws, it gives your Forge Fiend an ability to make opponents think twice about maybe just throwing some chaff at it, to neuter it for the rest of the game. But the reality is, with the Demon Jaws, you have a way to chew your way out of combat. You can't really get trapped. They're good enough that they will be more effective than just having basic close combat attacks. And I tend to favor units that have more versatility than units that are just, this is what I do. Unless what you do is just better than any versatility you could offer. That's my rule of thumb. So anyways, Vindicators, Forge Fiends, Mutaliths, then Predators if you really are taking that many vehicles. So why Vindicators? They're really good. Yes, they're a little bit swingy, but they're very tough. And if you've ever played into Vindicators, even without an invuln save, they are incredibly difficult to deal with. You don't mind getting into close combat because they get to keep shooting. And, they just basically have the ability to go up and hold the point on something. That's your frontline unit. You zoom them up, take 2 or 3 of them, however you want to play it, zoom them up, have them go hold your board, and then sit the Forge Fiends behind them. And then when the Vindicators eventually drop, then bring the Forge Fiends up and to take their place. Pretty simple formula. Again, I think Warpforged, it's not the kind of detachment that I think you're going to be able to maximize at a tournament. I think you're just going to find that there are more armies that just can deal with your tanks very, very quickly. I think ultimately Knights is a very good example that they'll see your vehicles and they'll start frothing and they'll just go, oh wow, half your army's going to be dead in a couple turns. And that's the reality. It will be. They will just shoot better than you from farther away, and they'll just take you out. Next up, we have Warpmeld. Warpmeld is the Zangor detachment, the mutant detachment. It's kind of in a weird state because we're not sure, is it good? Is it not good? My conclusion is, I think it's good for teams. It wants you to take a lot of bodies. It wants you to take a lot of mutants. It wants you to do -1 to wound on your stuff, get +1 to wound on stuff, so you've got to have bodies and ways to take those mortals. So you're loading up on things like Chaos Spawns, Mutiliths, and Zangors. What I don't like about this is, where's the damage coming from? I don't see where a lot of the damage output is coming from if you're loading up on those. Yes, Mutiliths are very good. They're a good supplement to an already good army. They are not a good core to build around, all right? Something like Magnus in Grand Coven, that's a core. That's a centerpiece that you build around. Mutiliths are not that. They only have a 5-up emblem. They are able to be dispatched pretty quickly. See how well that holds up when your knight friend shoots at your Mutilith. And generally speaking, they're a little bit bulky. They can't necessarily move up the board as fast as you'd want to. Temporal Surge is a must, and you're only going to have one of them that can get Temporal Surged. So at the end of the day, I think this, again, is another B-tier army, maybe on the lower end of B, and I'm giving it some kudos here because I think there is a chance for dumping that many Zangors on the table, making them -1 to wound, and simply stat checking your opponent. I think there are matchups where that would make a lot of sense. It's a heavy skew, which also means that it lends itself to team play a lot more. It's going to be good into things that just don't want to be wounding Zangors on a 5 or a 6. Like if a bunch of strength 3 stuff or a bunch of strength 4 stuff can slant the math really bad, and yeah, that can be in your favor. And they're only 1 wound bodies, so stuff that's hitting you with Thunderhammers or Power Fists and stuff like that, you don't care. You just killed 1 Zangor, congrats. There's 20 more. So it has some cool play. It has a couple cool stratagems. The Gift of Change stratagem basically just says when there's a Thousand Sons character that dies, you can make a Chaos Spawn. Anytime, in my opinion, that you're able to just get free models for command points, translate that command points to points on the table, I think that's really, really good. Yes, you're only getting 1 Chaos Spawn model as a result, but I think that's incredibly, incredibly good. Yes, you can also only do it once per battle round, so the most you would ever get is 5 Chaos Spawn over the course of the game. That being said, that means you're also losing 5 characters over the course of the game. Maybe that's not the best situation, but I think there are some janky things that you can potentially do. As we saw back in 8th edition, where you could flesh change your sorcerers and create Chaos Spawns and do some really, really neat stuff with it. I think overall, the stratagems that are in this are quite good. They're also all 1 CP. They're all very, very useful. The fact that you can get a 6-inch deep strike, even though in the codex it's worded as 3 inches, they're going to change that to be 6 inches. I think that's really, really good. You can basically fit almost anything you would want that was up into reserves. You can bring that back down 3 inches away, or 6 inches away, sorry, which is a scoring capability. Also be able to just pick a Zangor unit, give it a 4-up invuln. Really, really, really. So you can do it in close combat, you can do it in shooting, and I think that's really, really good. Now, obviously, you can't use that on something like a Mutilith, but hey, It's better than nothing. So I think in general, it's a good detachment for teams. It's maybe going to have a tough time crawling out of that. Also, who the hell wants to paint that many Zangors? You're talking, what, 80, 100 Zangors? I applaud the person who decides to try and go make that happen. I'm not going to be the person that does that. Finally, of the new-ish detachments here that we get is Phalanx. Now, I say new-ish because we've kind of had this before in previous editions. It's the All is Dust one. It's the one you want to load up with a bunch of Rubric Marines. Here's the thing. This detachment looks really good on paper. And it looks really good on paper because you're thinking, hey, all of a sudden, all of my Rubric Marines and my Terminators are getting +1 to their save on 1 damage weapons. You have to understand that there are not that many 1 damage weapons that are really going to be carrying or getting dumped into your Rubric Marines to make it that effective. A lot of everything that's going to be hitting them is going to be damage 2 and damage 3. That's the game right now. That's the meta. That's what's being pushed. So there will be situations where, hey, it does work for you. They're going to be fewer than the norm. On top of that, the tools that are in this, not great. The only one that's really sort of good is the Infiltrate one. And it's only sort of good because there's only some situations where you're going to want to infiltrate 10 Terminators or 20 Rubric Marines. And then you've got to take 10 Terminators or 20 Rubric Marines in your list. Not saying that's not going to be fun, but it's not probably going to be good. And then you're stuck with the Terminators up front unless you then take Ahriman as well. So all that being said, we still need clarifications on what happens with the Sorcerer or the attached leader when they get put into a unit. Can they still infiltrate with that unit? According to the rules right now, the way they're written, no, you can't, but an FAQ could change that. Very, very possible within reason. They just reword the enhancement so they don't even have to FAQ it. They just rewrite it in a way that it works. The fact that the stratagems from the Zangor detachment were written with 3-inch rules rather than 6-inch rules kind of tells you that when this was written was back before they rolled all those changes out, which kind of tells you, yeah, you know, there could be some wiggle room here for them to do some rewriting, and while they're in there, they might as well rewrite this one. So it should be something like, while he's leading the unit, they have infiltrate, and then we've got a game. We'll see what happens. We should get the FAQ sometime the next couple weeks or so, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. Other than that, honestly, I just don't see anything in this detachment that tells me this is going to be something that just stat checks everything, because it isn't really stat checking things. You don't see other armies out there as like just loading up on Marines. That's all Rubric Marines are. They are Marines at the end of the day. It's not the kind of thing that is, at the moment, dominating the game. You need to have some kind of gimmick. You need to have like -1 to wound, or you need to have extra toughness on your guys. Something that says, hey, these guys are harder to kill. And even then, you have Gravis, for example, in Space Marines, which are tougher Marines, more wounds. They're not doing well getting spammed in this meta. Why? Well, because the meta is loaded up on 2 and 3 damage weapons, as I alluded to begin with, and they pick those models up very, very quickly. So it's just not the kind of thing that I think right now deserves any higher than maybe a C tier. I have fun on the weekends with it. Bring out all your Rubric Marines. It'll be a fun detachment to run. There's some fun things to do with it. But for the moment, it is not a strong detachment that you can really go compete with. Okay, so now we're getting to the Grotmist detachment, and I know I'm skipping out ahead here. I want to talk about the Demons ones last. The Grotmist detachment came out last year with all the other Grotmist detachments. It was a very nice gesture by GW to roll something out at that time. I still maintain some suspicion that there were some supply issues or something that happened where things they wanted to roll out at that time were not ready to get rolled out. And so they had to come up with something, and that's why there's such a disparity between the haves and the have-nots with the Grotmist detachments. and that some of the things were too good and a lot of it was not good at all. I don't have a lot of hope for that detachment. I think it's not giving you anything that your army already gives you in its data sheets. It's not doing all that much other than what Grand Coven already does, and you've got to work for it a lot harder. It just doesn't really do anything unless you just like the mechanics of it and want to have fun with it. Good for you. That's great. I support you, but it sucks. All right? That detachment sucks. And it's going into F tier. If there was a lower tier, I'd put it lower than that. But, okay, hold on. I can't do that. Because now, let's talk about the Demons detachment. Because the Demons detachment is below Grotmas, okay? It is the worst detachment that we have gotten in 10th edition. It's also possibly one of the worst detachments in all of 40k right now. I had so many hopes that as I was looking at this, I initially started thinking, oh, that could be good and that could be good. And then what you then see is all the restrictions that they put on top of it. Like, hey, this is cool. The demons can cast rituals now. Oh, but none of the demons can benefit from those rituals. Well, why have that then? Why bring demons and Thousand Sons together if they can't benefit from anything from each other? And the first thought is, oh, well, we need to restrict the power that you might have on them. Well, you're restricting what units we can bring, and you're restricting how many points we can bring of demons. What other restrictions are there for you to put on us? Like, there's nothing else we're gaining other than just restrictions in this detachment. It doesn't offer anything either. You have to have line of sight to the demons for a 4-up invuln on stuff that already has invulns across the board. Like Terminators already have 4-up invulns. Rubric Marines 5-up invulns, but you can get 4-up invulns. So what? Why? What is the purpose of this? It just doesn't. It doesn't do anything other than just let you run Demons and Thousand Sons together. That's literally all it lets you do. It doesn't give you any benefit for doing that. Meanwhile, all the other armies that are out there that are getting similar detachments actually gain a benefit for doing so. Now, they don't get to do certain things that the other detachments get. That's part of the game. You have a trade-off. This doesn't give you any trade-offs. It's just all losses, all right? You're not trading for anything good. You're just getting all bad. So it's a waste of time. It's a waste of a detachment. It needs to be completely rewritten. What else is there to say? And that is your Thousand Sons tier list for detachments. Hope you guys all enjoyed. Catch you next time.